to the Community Climate Hub Initiative. My name is Alexa DeLuey, Transportation and Urban Agriculture Research Intern at the Climate Reality Project Canada. Through several trainings each year, including in Denver and Seattle earlier this year and in Pittsburgh next month, Climate Reality trains leaders to share the urgency of and solutions to climate change. We're also helping create community climate hubs throughout the country that will help raise the bar on climate action in Canadian cities while spurring ambition at the provincial and federal levels. This webinar is the first in our fall series, which you can see listed on your screen. Sign up for the upcoming webinars at climatehub.ca. These webinars are meant to exchange best practices and tools that you can leverage in your own cities to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy. Today's webinar features Vivian Kaloxilos, founder of Doctere and co-organizer of the Living Soils Symposium. Marveled by the natural world, Vivian studied ecosystem regeneration at McGill University's School of Environment. Outside of school, she studied permaculture and agroforestry and practiced the application of these concepts as these practices offer solutions towards mitigating disastrous climate change and world hunger. Special ecological fieldwork training with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in 2011 confirmed that applied field ecology was the direction Vivian wanted to take her skills. After a few years of practice in ecosystem regeneration through permaculture techniques, she went to study privately with Dr. Elaine Ingham of Soil Foodweb Inc. in order to train in soil ecology, soil microbial microscopy, applied microbial soil regeneration, and high-quality compost, inoculum, and microbial amendment creation. He has since founded Doctere, a soil consulting service and laboratory, and continues to work side by side with Dr. Ingham and other certified soil consultants in the field. Vivian is the program advisor and carbon offset coordinator for Living Soils Symposium Montreal.
Thank you very much, Alexa, for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us and for taking interest in soils. Very used to talking about soils and people kind of like rolling their eyes. Not very interesting. However, soils do pose a very interesting solution for many, many issues that we face globally today. Let me take 1 second to share my presentation with you. I'll get going. Okay. All right, so welcome. This is a short webinar about living soils for climate. There's a lot of information, background, kind of basic information that comes with this new paradigm of living soils. But, myself, as it was mentioned, I study at the School of Environment. I've been looking for climate solutions for a long time. Something concrete. Obviously, there are very more than one very kind of serious problems in the world right now. We have, while the East Coast is being hit by hurricanes, and the West Coast is, wildfires all over the place, and farmers are losing crops, a growing population. There's all of these things to consider, and it can freak us out. And for me, it took a long time to find a concrete solution to a lot of these issues. And for a second, we can just breathe and take comfort in knowing that their solution lies right underneath our feet. And quite literally, we live on planet Earth. Okay, so what is Earth? And if Earth was a member of our community, if the soil was an incarnated person living in our day-to-day, lives, we have teachers, we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have bakers, we have artists, all very important contributing members of our society. But if the soil was a member of our society, what role does she take in the critical support of life in a day-to-day community? Well, a healthy soil will be absorbing and slowing down, capturing water, rainwater that's coming in, and filtering it to replenish our groundwater reserves. While it's slowly filtering through the soil, this provides a store of water in case of drought. So a healthy soil will be providing this service for a community every day. Healthy soil will also be decontaminating diseases, pathogens for humans, plants, and animals on a day-to-day basis. It's kind of like the human body. If you have, more disease-causing microbes in your gut versus more beneficial microbes in your gut system, you'll either stay healthy or get sick. And if you're outnumbering the disease with beneficial microbes, then you have a disease-suppressing system right there. Soil is also responsible to recycle everything that dies and to turn it back into resources so that something else can use it for its own life source. Nutrient cycling is called. It creates and stores nutrients and minerals and makes them available to the plants at the rate the plants want them, in the form that they need them. And the last thing is that this earth is a living, breathing entity. It breathes and it exhales. It inhales greenhouse gases and it exhales healthy atmospheric gases, which allowed our species and mammals in general to evolve. So if the earth literally was a person incarnated in society, we would literally be bowing down every day to this thing because it literally supports all that are our basic functions that we need to live on a day-to-day basis. So we're talking about living soil. So what's the difference between living and dead soil? Well, on the left, you see here that the big difference here is that there's no microorganisms. There are no microbes on the dirt side, and there are microorganisms on the soil side. These microbes, the fungi, literally build structure in the soil. They take small soil particles, they clump them together, and they tie them together, literally building buildings in the soil and creating pools for air and water. So if you look at this situation where you have living soil that's well structured because of that versus dirt, structureless, lifeless soil, you look at water coming in the system. Well, on the dirt side, it's either going to start puddling and then running off and increasing sedimentation in all of our streams, which eventually leads to rising acidity of the oceans. Any trace elements, any chemicals, any salts, anything that might have been in that dirt will be leaving with the water. And so here we have loss of nutrients from our fields, and we have eutrophication of our water systems. And you can see this cascade effect. We also don't have water filtering down and replenishing our groundwater reserves in this lifeless scenario. In the other scenario where we do have microbes building structure, when the water comes in, because that structure is built, there are pockets and pools that the water can be absorbed. It slows the water down and slowly filters down through the layers of the soil. And the organisms that are there are going to be taking any of the trace elements that might have been in the water and tying it into their bodies or into the organic matter. And so slowly this water filters down to replenish our clean water reserves, our drinking water reserves. And in the meantime, if there's a drought, well, this soil has absorbed all this rainfall, so it's resilient to that drought. So we have very different scenarios. And it's all, the big difference is really these guys, the soil food web. Bacteria are a very famous soil microorganism, but of course the soil contains much more than just bacteria. Fungal life in the soil is so incredibly important. And every time we till, every time we compact and spray and add fungicides, we are killing this fungi that is creating the structure of our soil and the capacity to absorb water and to keep nutrients. We have their higher level predators. The bacteria and fungi, you can think of them as the grand recyclers of the soil. they recycle nutrients and minerals, but they keep them in their bodies, and you got to kill them in order to get them out. And so that's what happens. Their predators come, they consume bacteria and fungi, and they release those nutrients into the soil, now in a plant available form, etc. And it keeps going. So these, it's like I said, if you take an antibiotic, you know, and you never take a probiotic after, well, don't be surprised that you keep getting sick, because your immune system, your body functions, and its basic functions rely on a good, healthy human microbiome. And it is no different with the soil. So with all of the tilling and spraying of chemicals and compaction, and, you know, mining and anything else you could really think of, we are effectively killing these soil microbes every time. And then we have farmers who are addicted to higher inputs of chemical fertilizers, and each time they further destroy their biology. And so the situation just cycles out of control, where we have farmers increasing the amount of pesticides and inputs they need to use for a declining yield, and it's getting more and more expensive. So this is an issue. This is a soil problem. Here you can see we have on the left, we have a compacted soil situation. On the right, we have a nice, dark, healthy, living soil where the tree roots were able to penetrate down and reach for water and minerals and nutrients. We have no disease, we have nice production. And this is the fundamental difference between living soil and non-living soil. And some fundamental relationship to understand when people say, well, how do I manage my soil? You shouldn't manage the soil. Your plant, the way it does, we all know plants do photosynthesis. So it takes in carbon and sunlight. It puts out oxygen. That's not where photosynthesis ends. They do photosynthesis to create sugars. They make exudates, is what we call plant sugars. And they sweat them all throughout their root system and throughout the foliage of their plant in order to attract the microbes who are going to go and get the rest of the food that they need. The nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, molybdenum, all of these things in the soil, what they need is not in a plant available form yet. So a plant can't just subside off of carbon and sunlight. They put these exudates into the soil in order to feed and attract the microbes. And it's kind of like human sweat, how we have pheromones that can attract certain people. Well, these plant juices are exactly the same. They have pheromones that can attract the microbes that they need. All of a sudden, there's a constant abundance of food. The biology will multiply, multiply, multiply until all around the root system, you have this castle wall of immunity, of good microbes. And so if any disease tries to get in, well, it's got to get through millions of its competitors, wrap around the root system and hook in order for it to contaminate. And that's just not going to happen. So this is natural disease suppression. And this is natural nutrient availability for plants. As the plant gives its root juices, and the bacteria and fungi are like, yay, thank you. The plant goes, wait a second. Here's the shopping list today. Yesterday I was craving calcium and boramine, but today I'm craving more magnesium and sulfur. So could you get me that? And actually, I'm a little thirsty too, so bring me some water. This is how it works. And when a plant is able to establish these healthy circumstances, you no longer have to think about how do you manage your soil, what do you feed to your plants. It's the soil microbes that do it. So if we're trying to move away from chemical agriculture, and we're trying to move away from using pesticides on golf courses and cemeteries and parks, on agriculture fields, obviously, then we need to team up with life in the soil. We need to reinstall it. And the way we do it is by creating composts and building soil, organic matter on the soil. We use permaculture techniques, but a lot of composts, compost teas, and extracts, which unfortunately in this webinar we won't have time to go through. The other really important factor about the soil is that, like I said earlier, it's a living, breathing organism. So the more microbes that it managed to grow in the soil, the more the plant needs to feed these microbes with its plant juices. So the more photosynthesis this plant is going to do. And each time you increase in microbial biomass, your plants start sequestering more and more carbon. And each one of these microbes, fungi are literally tubes of carbon. Every time a protozoa eats a bacteria, they're storing five carbon molecules in the soil. So the more and more life we have in the soil, the more organic matter we have turning into humus, the more carbon we sequester. And not just carbon, we can sequester all kinds of greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide, which is 306 times stronger than carbon dioxide on atmospheric impacts, and it impacts the ozone. So are we helpless with climate change? Can we feed the world? Can we replenish our water reserves? Yes, but we're gonna have to team up and start putting the earth back on its feet. Literally, we live on planet Earth, life above, so below. If we don't have strong, healthy, diverse soil ecosystems under the ground, how are we supposed to maintain strong and healthy, diverse ecosystems above the ground? So, you know, we go into here, holistic land management, regenerative graze management, permaculture, agroecology, large scale cover cropping with the crops, all of these techniques, no-till. These are the ways to rebuild the soil. We need to stop killing the soil organisms with chemicals and start putting them back in. Compost, compost teas, compost extracts can help re-inoculate soils with these missing organisms, as well as leaving organic matter and cover cropping. So, you know, as was mentioned, I am the program advisor and carbon offset coordinator for the Living Soil Symposium Montreal, which is a 3-day conference happening at Concordia University, Restore the Climate, Feed the World. And we will be focusing on the 4 major ecosystem services and functions of the soil, and particularly focusing on the climate solutions with regards to living soil sciences. At the end of the conference, we would like to leave room for the participants to speak among each other, throw ideas around. So we will have 12 breakout sessions going on. And there's a lot that people can do. All of this seems very abstract, but quite simply, if your parents spray their lawns every year to make them look green, tell them to stop. Maybe put a compost tea instead. Do you compost yourself? Or send it to your municipal composting service every time we put our waste in the landfill that creates greenhouse gases? Do you support organic farms? There's a lot of things that you can do to help support the Living Soils movement in your day-to-day lives. So maybe in question period, we can talk more about that. But for me, for now, that is what I'll say.
Thank you so much for joining us, Vivian. Vivian and I met several weeks ago, and her infectious passion for soil science and for the solutions that it offers for climate convinced me that we needed to share what she's going to share at the Living Soil Symposium on our webinar today, and record it for the folks all over Canada who are building hubs together in their communities and moving forward. So I'll say a couple of words quickly about the Climate Hub campaign, and then we'll get into some questions. So if you have questions, you can post them in the Q&A section, or you can post them in the chat. Both of those features will work. We will receive your questions. We did receive a couple from the registration form, and a number of people who registered weren't able to attend, but they've left their questions for us to answer in their absence. So these climate hubs, citizens are getting together They're acting locally on climate. They recognize that it's good to, you know, sign petitions for international agreements and things like that, but it's also very important to get your hands dirty, you know, in your community. So that's one of the 3 pillars of this initiative. Second being citizen-driven. We are an environmental organization. We are trying to equip people and empower people to take action themselves in their communities. There will never be enough funding to pay every single person to plant a community garden. And that's what is needed. So citizen-driven initiatives allow people to say, I'm going to do it because it's improving my quality of life, it's improving my health, it's improving my, my community. And finally, diversity. And so it's really, from our perspective, important to reach into the, every constituency in your municipality to say, how could your life be made better by reducing our carbon emissions? Could we make the streets safer through, you know, for your children, for young parents to cycle to school? Or could we offer opportunities to have your kids get involved in community gardens? Could we allow car sharing such that there's less traffic? All sorts of things like that can improve the quality of life while incorporating or bringing in diverse communities to support the transition. And the objective of these organizations, these climate hubs, will be to push their city along this 5-step milestone framework that was established by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So creating a GHG inventory, if your town doesn't already have one, setting a target for reduction of emissions, developing a local climate action plan, implementing the plan, and monitoring the progress. So many municipalities have already embarked, but many have not. So the next step, another thing that the Climate Hub Initiative aims to do is share resources. So we develop resources here at Climate Reality that we can share, including resources about, explaining or communicating the issue of climate change, the urgency and the solutions. In addition to benchmarking city progress one against the other, and even within a city, how are we progressing on transportation? The hubs, part of their role will be to keep public officials accountable, to say, we promised this on, on transportation policy. That was 3 years ago. What's happened since then? And there'll be a force to follow up. So with that, I will open the floor to questions, and I will have a look at the Q&A box as well as the former questions that were posted online. So we'll start with one that was asked in the registration link. Vivian, how do you communicate the importance of soils to homeowners and landowners in urban settings? How do you get them beyond their kind of, I guess, habits of spraying pesticides? Are there engagement programs that you've seen particularly effective?
Yeah, so yes, I have worked I have worked in landscaping with using regenerative landscape practices. And what seems to pique the interests of suburban and urban landowners is saving money on water bills. Because when you use chemicals or salt-based fertilizers, like I mentioned, you're killing a lot of these organisms that create the structure for your soil to keep water. In our case in Canada, we get fantastic snow melt every spring. And, if your soil can absorb that, doesn't matter if you have a drought for a month or a month and a half coming afterwards, because there's a huge reserve of water in your soil versus, if you're killing all your organisms all the time and there is, none of that water keeping, and it kind of just puddles and you've got moss growing on top of your grass. Well, you're going to be watering that a lot throughout the summer. Your blue grass is going to be brown grass by the end of May. So one thing is to go on that take that angle of saving water bills, saving money on water bills.
Okay. Another question here. The municipality of Hudson, Quebec, banned pesticides altogether. Is that a realistic expectation for hubs to demand of their municipalities to say, we don't want to use chemical-based fertilizers and pesticides? Is that a possible municipal policy demand that hubs can make? Have you seen it happen elsewhere?
The Hudson story is one of my favorites because it's the best example of how local action, community members getting involved, going there to city council meetings and making a difference. Hudson succeeded. They fought in court for, I believe, 7 years or something like that, with a chemical company conglomeration, and they won. And what happened after actually is that many municipalities across Canada and the United States did the same thing. Not all of them, but lots of municipalities. It kind of spread like wildfire across Canada and the United States. They banned cosmetic use of chemicals on private land. However, this didn't include agricultural land or golf courses. And Hudson still has one of the highest cancer rates in Canada because they have 4 golf courses that surround their community. And recently, they had had a consultation with me as a community to ask, would it be possible to treat golf courses with, regenerative techniques, and they still have really nice golf courses? And the answer is yes. And you're going to save a lot of money by doing it because your inputs are going to fall. And like I said, your irrigation is also going to go down. And people around will not be getting ill. So Hudson is a very interesting case. I do believe it is something that hubs can go and use as an example to push the ban of chemical use in their communities. Also seeing as they were just the first one that started the wildfire. So if you still live in a town that hasn't passed this bylaw, and you can get a group of citizens together, then go for it, because there's a strong momentum already behind you. And there's a lot of power in bylaws, not waiting for federal action. There's a lot of power in municipal bylaws.
Great, thanks. Another question, how is the city of Montreal specifically, I mean, if you're familiar with another city, that's fine too, but I guess it's a question from Montreal, using compost collected from various parts of the city, is it being used in a way, either in Montreal specifically or generally, when a municipality collects all that compost, is it used in an effective way, or maybe would it be better for citizens to keep the compost in their yard, spread it in in their neighborhood?
I think it would depend on the facility. Obviously, composting is a solution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to reduce waste going into landfills, and it's a good one. However, I'm unsure of the quality of the process going on in the various composting facilities in Montreal on a large scale. If composting by definition means aerobic decomposition, so decomposition with oxygen. And as soon as you start to have those smells, like a smelly compost, that's no longer the case. There's no longer a lot of oxygen in there. And in that low oxygen decomposition environment, you are creating tons of greenhouse gases. So it depends on whether it's being composted aerobically or not. And, this would go to the same as soil treated with chemicals, for example, or salts, would also be releasing tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So land management practices have a huge impact. Soil right now around the world contributes 78 gigatons of greenhouse gases every year. That's massive. That's almost equivalent to human creation. So by composting properly, by using regenerative land management practices, we can not only reduce anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, but we can actually start reversing and cleaning out the atmosphere from past emissions. So yeah, composting, city composting is a very good solution. If I would go see your facility, and if it doesn't smell good, then it's no good. If it doesn't smell good, you have greenhouse gases being created and they need to modify their system. And in your backyard, it's the same thing. If it smells bad, you've just volatilized your nutrients into greenhouse gases and acids. So keeping it nice and oxygenated, lots of brown stuff in there with your food scraps is the way to go. Keep that nice smell so that we are not creating greenhouse gas emissions.
Great. Thank you so much, Vivian, for being with us. I'll ask Alexa to join us again to wrap things up.
Hello. Thank you for being with us, especially thank you to Vivian. We hope you've come away with knowledge and inspiration to get active in your community, and we invite you to sign up to join a hub at climatehub.ca. Our next English webinar is on Tuesday, September 19th at 5 p.m. Eastern, and will feature Lily Barraclough, co-founder of the Toronto Youth Environmental Council and director of I Matter Youth Canadian branch. You can sign up on that same site, climatehub.ca. Thanks again and see you next week.